Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to really cut through the noise, pull out those key insights.
Especially for you, if you're someone who likes learning quickly, getting different angles, and, having those aha moments without feeling overwhelmed.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Wow, it's a heavy one, but incredibly powerful.
It really is. It blends his own devastating experiences in Nazi concentration camps with his philosophy, his whole approach to psychotherapy.
Right, which is logotherapy. And that's kind of our mission for this deep dive, isn't it? To understand what logotherapy is all about.
Yeah, particularly this core idea, the will to meaning.
Mhm.
We want to explore how Frankl developed this from his experiences and what it tells us about resilience, about finding purpose, even when things are unimaginably bad.
Okay, so yeah, we need to acknowledge the context is intense, really intense.
Definitely.
But we're going to unpack the most important, insightful parts in a way that's hopefully engaging and accessible. Might even find some surprising perspectives in there.
Well, one thing that's fascinating from the get-go is Frankl himself. He wasn't just experiencing this horror, he was a trained psychiatrist while he was imprisoned,
Yeah.
right up until the very end almost.
That's such a crucial point. His training gave him this almost objective viewpoint, even amidst the chaos.
It absolutely did. And logotherapy, which came out of all this, is known as the Third Viennese School of Psychotherapy. It followed Freud and Adler.
And when we think Freud, we often think, unconscious drives, digging into the past, maybe sexual frustration.
Right. Freud focused heavily on the will to pleasure. Adler, maybe more on the will to power.
Okay.
Frankl respected them, definitely. Gordon Allport mentions in the treatise how tolerant Frankl was. But Frankl proposed something different as the primary driver.
Which is?
The will to meaning, our fundamental innate search for purpose in our lives.
The will to meaning, okay.
And he argued that when that will is frustrated, when we can't find meaning, that's where a specific kind of psychological distress comes from. He called it neurogenic neurosis.
Noonagetic. Coming from the Greek nous, for mind or spirit.
Exactly. He saw this as originating in the nonological dimension, the uniquely human part of us concerned with values, meaning spirit. It's distinct from purely psychological issues or psychogenic neuroses.
So it's not necessarily about, say, unresolved childhood stuff. It could be about feeling your life lacks purpose right now.
Precisely. Your anxiety might actually be a signal that the way you're living isn't aligned with what you find meaningful. It's a very different approach than just looking for hidden conflicts.
Yeah, that feels quite profound, actually.
And connecting this back, the concentration camps were the ultimate horrific testing ground for these ideas.
The conditions, Frankl describes them so vividly, losing everything, even your name becoming a number, the constant threat of death, the selections.
That chilling image of the chimney, always there.
Mhm.
And just the sheer physical misery, starvation, freezing cold, constant brutality. It's almost impossible to truly comprehend.
He talks about the initial shock, the sort of disbelief, and then the striking out of your former life.
Yeah, like his manuscript, his life's work, just tossed aside. Imagine that loss of identity.
Unimaginable.
Then came what he observed as a second phase. This deep apathy. An emotional numbing setting in.
Like a defense mechanism.
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
A way to cope with the constant pain, the longing for home, the disgust at the everyday horrors. He gives examples of how seeing terrible things became normalized almost.
Yeah, the deadening of feeling. He mentions that struggle for just basic survival, like getting food, overshadowing everything else.
Right, sentiment just gets eroded. That story you mentioned about the train going through Vienna.
Oh, yeah, his hometown.
And the others on the train just didn't care about his desperate wish for a glimpse.
Yeah.
It shows how deep that emotional shutdown went. It's heartbreaking.
It really is. And this is maybe the core of the book, isn't it? Even in that situation?
Yes. Even then, Frankl identified what he called the last of human freedoms.
The ability to choose one's attitude.
Exactly. No matter what they did to you externally, that inner freedom, your response, your attitude towards your suffering, that couldn't be taken away.
So, okay, faced with that level of suffering, how did people find the strength? Where did meaning come from?
Well, Frankl leans heavily on Nietzsche here. He who has a why to live can bear with almost anyhow.
Finding meaning in the suffering itself or despite it?
Both, in a way. He saw meaning as the key to survival. And he identified several sources of this inner strength, this why.
Like what?
Love was huge. He talks about this incredibly intense experience on a forced march, freezing, miserable,
Yeah.
and he starts thinking intensely about his wife, her image,
Yeah.
and he experiences this moment of pure bliss, this profound connection. He realized love is the ultimate goal,
Yeah.
the highest thing we can aspire to.
Even just the thought of her gave him that strength.
Yes. Then there's humor. Seems impossible,
In
right?
a concentration camp, yeah.
But he called it a soul's weapon,
Mm.
a way to create a tiny bit of distance, to rise above the situation for just a moment.
He gives that example, doesn't he?
Yeah.
The surgeon imagining himself in an operating theater.
Yeah, watching the chief surgeon make the first cut, and someone whispers, action. Like it's a film set, dark. But it's that detachment, that momentary shift in perspective.
Was that common, did he think? That kind of mental trick?
He seemed to suggest it wasn't entirely rare. A survival tactic, and then even tiny joys.
Tiny joys.
Well, everything's relative, isn't it? He describes the absolute elation prisoners felt arriving at a camp that didn't have a crematorium chimney.
Wow. Just the absence of that specific horror was cause for joy.
Exactly.
Huh.
It shows how drastically the baseline shifts. Relief itself becomes a source of strength.
And he also mentioned the inner life, spirituality.
Definitely. For many, spiritual life deepened. Sincere religious feeling, improvised prayers whispered in the barracks. That provided an anchor.
And having a future goal. That seemed critical.
Absolutely vital. Something to look forward to, a reason to endure the present. That story about the composer.
Oh, the one who predicted his liberation date.
Yeah. And when that date passed and they weren't freed, he died very quickly. It's like his why just evaporated and the how became unbearable. So tragic.
It really underscores the psychological power of hope, of having a future orientation.
And interestingly, frankl also talks about the past. The idea that your experiences, good and bad, what you've lived through and achieved, even your suffering, that can't be taken away.
It's part of you.
It's part of your being, a kind of inner resource, a storehouse of meaning you've already created.
Okay, so let's tie this back tightly to logotherapy itself. The core idea is this will to meaning.
It's the primary motivation, he argues. Not pleasure, not power, but meaning.
And when that's blocked, that's existential frustration.
Right. And that frustration, that lack of meaning, can lead to those neurogenic neuroses we talked about, problems rooted in that existential, meaning-focused part of us.
Distinct from psychogenic neuroses, which are more about psychological conflicts.
Exactly. He gives that great example of the American diplomat.
Right, the one who is unhappy in his job.
Yeah, really successful career, but deeply discontented. He was undergoing traditional psychoanalysis, focusing on, like, his relationship with his father.
Trying to find a psychological root.
But frankl, using logotherapy, would likely have seen it as a frustrated will to meaning. His work wasn't fulfilling his need for purpose.
And apparently, when the diplomat eventually changed careers to something more aligned with his values.
The discontent vanished. It wasn't about his father complex. It was about the lack of meaning in his day-to-day work life.
That really clarifies the logotherapy approach. It's looking at that fundamental need.
It is. And frankl also challenges the idea that we should always aim for a tensionless state, like perfect psychological balance or homeostasis.
We shouldn't. I thought reducing stress was always the goal.
Well, he argues a certain amount of inner tension is actually healthy, even necessary for psychological well-being. He calls it new dynamics.
Dynamics. Okay, what's that?
Think of it as the tension between what you have achieved and what you still feel you ought to accomplish, or the gap between who you are now and who you could potentially become.
Like stretching towards a goal.
Exactly. Like a rubber band, if it's totally slack, there's no energy. But a healthy stretch, a meaningful goal pulling you forward, that creates dynamism, energy, purpose. That tension is life-affirming.
That makes sense. So it's not about eliminating tension, but ensuring the tension is meaningful.
Precisely. It comes back to having that why to live for. That's what helps you endure the hows. He brings up Nietzsche again and his observations from the camps and even studies of prisoners of war, all pointing to this. Those with a sense of purpose had a much better chance of survival, mentally and physically.
So what happens when people don't have that? When the will to meaning is consistently blocked or just absent?
That leads to what frankl called the existential vacuum.
The feeling of emptiness, meaninglessness.
Yeah, a sense that life is pointless. He saw this as a major issue in the 20th century, a kind of mass neurosis of modern times.
And why did he think it was becoming so common?
He pointed to a sort of twofold loss. First, as humans evolved, we lost some of the basic animal instincts that automatically tell creatures what to do.
We don't just operate on instinct.
Right. And second, the traditions that used to tell us what we ought to do We're rapidly crumbling.
So, without instinct telling us what we must do and tradition telling us what we should do, we're kind of left figuring out what we want to do.
Exactly. And often people didn't know, or they just did what others were doing or what others told them to do, leading to this inner emptiness.
The existential vacuum. And he connected this to boredom, didn't he?
Yes, he saw boredom as a major manifestation of this vacuum. When you lack purpose, life can feel incredibly monotonous and empty.
So how do we find meaning then, according to logotherapy? Is it some big secret?
Not at all.
Hmm.
He emphasized that the meaning of life isn't some abstract universal answer. It's concrete, it's personal,
Different for everyone.
different for everyone, and even different from moment to moment. He said life itself poses questions to us. Through our circumstances, our challenges, our opportunities, and we answer those questions not with words, but with our actions, with our conduct, by taking responsibility for the specific tasks life sets before us.
So meaning is found in doing and taking responsibility.
Yes, and crucially, even suffering can have meaning.
How can suffering have meaning? That seems counterintuitive.
When suffering is unavoidable, and Frankl stresses this, avoidable suffering should be eliminated. But when it's unavoidable, our attitude towards it becomes the task.
Back to that last freedom.
Exactly. Accepting that suffering is your unique challenge, facing it with courage, finding dignity within it. That act itself can be profoundly meaningful. It's an opportunity for inner growth.
So even when facing, say, a difficult diagnosis or a major setback at work, if it's unavoidable, how we choose to face it can itself become a source of meaning.
That's the idea,
Yeah.
which leads directly to his concept of tragic optimism.
Tragic optimism sounds like a paradox.
It does. But it means finding meaning, saying yes to life in spite of the tragic triad of human existence, pain, guilt, and death.
So accepting that these things are part of life, but not letting them negate meaning.
Precisely. Finding meaning despite them. We talked about finding meaning in unavoidable suffering, like that Polish cardiologist facing death with dignity.
Right. What about guilt?
Frankl strongly opposed collective guilt, focusing instead on individual responsibility. Guilt points to where we've fallen short, but it also offers the chance to change, to grow, to make amends, or become better. Overcoming guilt can be meaningful.
And death. The fact that life is temporary.
He saw the transitoriness of life not as a reason for despair, but as a spur to action. It makes each moment precious, encourages us to make responsible choices. And the past isn't lost.
It's that greenery idea again.
Yeah, filled with the deeds done, the love loved, the suffering borne courageously. Those fulfilled meanings are stored safely in the past and can't be undone.
So ultimately, the message is that life's potential meaning is unconditional.
Unconditional. It remains possible under any circumstances, even the worst suffering. And he parallels this with the unconditional value and dignity of every single person.
Wow. Okay. Reflecting on all this from man's search for meaning, that concept of the will to meaning just feels incredibly powerful.
It really resonates, doesn't it?
Yeah.
His own experiences provided such a stark, undeniable validation of how central meaning is to our resilience, to our very humanity.
And it's not just about surviving extreme horror, is it? The practical value of logotherapy seems huge for just everyday life.
Absolutely. It's a framework for actively looking for purpose in our work, in our relationships, in how we contribute. And importantly, in how we choose to face the inevitable difficulties that life throws our way.
Finding meaning isn't just for philosophers or people in crisis.
Not at all. Frankl suggested three main avenues: creating a work or doing a deed, experiencing something or encountering someone, love being key here, and the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. Meaning is accessible.
Yeah, it can be found in the ordinary, in small acts, in connection, in our perspective. So for you, the learner listening in, we hope this deep dive has sparked some of those aha moments. Maybe a new way to think about challenges, focusing on meaning.
And perhaps a deeper appreciation for that amazing human capacity for finding purpose, even when things seem bleak.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe something for you to reflect on.
Yeah, ask yourself, what are the things, big or small, that give your life meaning right now? What's your current why?
And following on from that, how could you maybe consciously cultivate more meaning, find more purpose in your daily life, especially when you hit those inevitable rough patches?
It's a personal question, but Frankl's work suggests it's one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves. Definitely worth pondering your own why.